So I think we'll start in a few seconds. I think there's still some people out at tea, not out for lunch yet. Okay, so while people come in, let me just start this session. Good morning, everybody, once again, and welcome to the panelists. We still have one panelist who will arrive in a bit, Mr. Ajay Mathur. He is in a meeting, but he will arrive. And Mr. Anil Jain has to leave after his presentation for a meeting. So we'll change the format of the session a bit. We'll have Mr. Anil Jain go first, and then he will take questions, and then he has to leave for a meeting, by which time, hopefully, Mr. Ajay Mathur will join us. And then we'll have Dr. Ramprasad Sengupta make a presentation. This session is on the implications of innovation in alternative energy sources. And if you hear at the inaugural, the dinner talk, you must have heard, where is the G20 agenda going as crisis management, trying to manage the crisis. The G20 did a good job because there was a consensus of what needed to be done. And then as it moves forward towards crisis prevention, what does the future for G20 look like? And that's a kind of a burning existential question that we have. And I think climate change and development of alternative energy sources is kind of begs that question. If there's an alternative institution that is able to look at these issues and try and build consensus amongst countries, mind you, it's going to be terribly hard to do given the nature of the beast. It's going to be terribly hard to achieve, but G20 can still play a role in trying to kind of get the intellectual capital there, try and build the knowledge. But it's, as I said, it's a difficult task. It's a difficult ask for the G20. For India, the debate on alternative energy systems is one of, should we get there? And if we have to get there, how long will it take for us to get there? And especially, what are the costs of getting there? And what are the legacy costs of retiring our existing resources and planning for these new sources? The debate in the developed world is perhaps linked to climate change and emissions. And there's a move towards trying to reduce emissions in the developed world, try to get some cap on the emissions. But the debate in India hasn't reached that stage yet. We're doing some work in ICRIER on how we can merge the two kind of extremes in terms of leveraging, as I would say, as we're saying in our research, is there are some co-benefits that we can leverage and try and get benefits in terms of both developing alternative energy systems as well as try and achieve some reductions in emissions. So we'll try and discuss some of these issues and more. I'm really grateful that we have an excellent panel. Mr. Anil Jain, who's going to go first, co-chairs the energy work in the G20. He's absolutely perfect to kick off this discussion. I'm not going to read his CV. He is an Indian Administrative Service Officer and works as an advisor in the Planning Commission. And I don't think we will entertain questions on the Planning Commission. We will entertain questions on energy systems, right? So, Mr. Jain.
Delegates, Dr. Kathuria's introduction was pretty elaborate, and while he was speaking, I think he did a good job of summarizing the drivers between the OECD and the non-OECD world on the issue of alternate energy. And I was very happy to hear that ICRIER is doing some work in trying to bridge the gap and see how the co-benefits of the two approaches bring about common goods, common benefits to the whole world. The topic today for this session is implications of innovations in alternate energy, and if I can complete the sentence, on the G20 and the G20 response to it. As regards the innovations part, I think that's a technical area. I would not like to get much into that. I think we are here to discuss more of the policy implications, national responses, and G20 as such, what is it doing and what will it be doing. This audience does not need to be introduced to what G20 is, but if I may offer some comments, G20, as you know, is a non-negotiating forum where we try to sit together. The 20 economies of the world, which amongst them combine, I think, 90% of the world's GDP, at least this is a very good forum where governments sit together, and since it's not a negotiable forum, there is not much hostility, there is bonhomie, there is exchange of ideas, and to a large extent, a lot of unanimity and a common approach is built over there. But when we come to the topic of renewable energy, alternate energy, I think it's a very interesting scenario which I will just unfold before you. Before I get into the specifics, specific comments of mine, let me take you back to the recent trends which have been visible in the G20 on renewable energy per se. Last year, in 2013, with Russian presidency, renewable energy did not find much of a mention in their chosen priorities under what you call the Energy Sustainability Working Group, where energy is discussed. They had 4 work streams. One of them was fossil fuel subsidies, which is a perennial topic at the G20. The second one was market transparency, where we were looking at how to bring in greater transparency, at least in the price reporting agencies in the commodity markets. And third was green growth. Now, mind you, green growth is not exactly renewable energy. It straddles between energy efficiency and renewable energy. And the fourth was investments in the energy sector. So renewable energy did not find a place of pride in the last year's agenda of the G20. Now, this year, under the Australian presidency, again, I'm sorry to say, renewable energy does not figure even to the extent of green growth, a mention of the green growth either. Again, this year we have fossil fuel subsidies, we have global energy architecture, we have a gas markets dialogue set up and how to improve the gas markets, and the fourth one is energy efficiency. So this is the background that in the G20, and rightly so, because G20 has got various groups, so to say, or countries belonging to different country unique circumstances. You have oil producers. Saudi Arabia is a very active member, and of course Russia as a major producer there. Now US also emerging. So you have major producers, you have major consumers, you have China there, you have India there, at least in the energy realm. And then you have the OECD, you have the non-OECD, and the OECD or non-OECD distinction in itself brings about lots of characteristics: consumers and fossil fuel subsidy driven, lots of imports, and you have a set of countries where energy consumption is now stabilized, and now their oil consumption, as you know, in OECD is registering a continuous drop in the last, I think, 6 years. In 5 years, oil consumption has dropped in the OECD. And but energy consumption is also virtually stabilized, with energy efficiency making major gains, and that is why the energy consumption and energy balance shifting towards the east, shifting towards the emerging countries. So this is the background of the united stand, so to say, or lack of it in the G20 towards the alternate energies. Now, in the background of this, I might offer 4 comments, I think 4 trends which I see which are visible towards renewable energy in the G20. Firstly, I see that the growth of renewable energy is probably shifting out of OECD into the non-OECD world. If you look at the Bloomberg New Energy Finance numbers, when they presented their numbers last year, 2013, when we held the Clean Energy Ministerial in Delhi, out of a total investment of about $300 billion in the year 2012, as a geo grouping, North America had the maximum. It had more than $100 billion. And China and the Pacific had less than that. So the biggest block of investment was in the North American world, and then China and Asia Pacific coming second, and the rest of the world, Europe, Africa, etc., coming later. Now, this year's report, which BNEF presented in Seoul at the SEM, we noticed that the investments in the US have fallen, and now China and the Asia Pacific have exceeded $100 billion, and now they are the biggest drivers of investments in the renewable energy sector. So, and then associated with this, if you look at the underlying reasons why the trends are shifting or diminishing in the OECD, perhaps you will see that the market dynamics are probably taking a bigger role. When you see the shale gas revolution taking place in the US, and their coal plants being retired or there being lesser demand for coal, the coal then moves along the Atlantic to the Europe. And as you notice that in the year 2012 particularly, the carbon emissions in Europe grew in comparison to the previous year because they consumed more coal, and they tried to reduce their consumption of other non-coal fossil fuels because coal was more economical. So with US shale gas revolution happening, there is of course a more tendency to move towards shale gas related electricity and chemicals and other productions, and renewable energy takes a back seat. On the other hand, in the emerging economies where we try to rationalize our power sector and where we can't continue with the burden of subsidies, there the prospects of renewable energy become more viable. As you know, in India, wind power has now virtually become has come at par with the conventional energy, and in solar there has been huge reductions in the prices of virtually half of the last 4 years. So this is the trend which I notice taking place. The second trend which follows from the first one is that the non-OECD members in the G20, India, China, Mexico, Brazil, South Africa, they seem to be leading now the renewable energy option, sheerly out of energy access and availability issues. With a lot of our habitations not connected, and even if connected by the grid, not being able to supply quality power, they are finding microgrids and mini grids and solar solutions and rest of it. So as innovation, so here I would like to weave in the fruits of innovation. With innovation driving down the prices of renewable energy, the uptake of renewable energy will be and is happening higher in the emerging members, the emerging country members of the G20. Even in wind or solar, when you look at the two major sources of renewable energy, you notice that in wind, though the technology has stabilized, but with the wind turbines achieving higher hub heights, going up to 100 meters, 150 meters, and becoming larger size, 3 megawatt, 4 megawatt sizes, the effective price of wind energy is coming down. And in solar, of course, there is no longer a major reduction in prices, but rather stiffening. But still, with the rising electricity prices, the hiatus between the two is diminishing. So innovation is driving the renewable energy agenda in the world as a whole. The third point which I notice is that, interestingly, while the OECD world nudges the emerging world to reduce their fossil fuel subsidies, which are indeed happening. As you know, in India, half of our near $25 billion annual subsidies on fossil fuels were going into diesel. And with the monthly hikes of 50 paisa per litre, which we have effected, now we are near wiping out that subsidy. It's only 1 rupee 70 paisa or so. And if the dollar were to remain stable and if this Iraqi problem were not to happen, I think the day is not very far when our subsidies just might come half. So interestingly, this subsidy which we save would help us in driving our renewable energy agenda. So this is a very interesting trend which is happening, that the fossil fuel subsidy issue is in a way helping us to uptake our renewable energy. And it, of course, because of the high prices of renewable energy, the OECD world will have problems. And you know that in Germany, for that matter, and Spain and other countries, the prices of the subsidies on the consumers have now become rather onerous. And this dynamics is now shifting towards the non-OECD world. The fourth trend which I notice is that innovation, as I mentioned, has a limit to its ability to reduce prices. In wind, as I mentioned, that the prices have now become stable, but the technology is working towards the other direction. And in solar, of course, it has now stabilized. But where innovation will make a difference is not in the R part of the R&D, but the D part, which I think is the deployment of the solar energy. And that is an area where emerging economies have a huge interest. Deployment of solar technologies, wind technologies, biomass, and small hydro, in solar rooftops and solar heating applications, solar lighting, solar lanterns, and micro irrigation. So these are things which are very relevant to the non-OECD world, and I don't think much of this innovation is going to take place in the OECD world because it doesn't make too much sense to them, but will probably happen in the emerging economies. And this has its own implications, that now the focus of the innovation in the renewable energy sector has to take place in these countries where these things are needed, and they may not mean big business to the multinationals and to the big companies. So innovation is not going to make a difference so much to energy, but to power. It will bring energy, power to the homes of the people who are not served. So friends, these are my observations, and as a whole, I feel that there may not be a united stand, or you may not get a clear, unambiguous signal from the G20 world on innovations in RE, but it is going to be a country-wise response. And interestingly, the uptake of RE will be self-driven in the non-OECD countries, which is otherwise today a focus of the OECD world, that to curb carbon emissions, etc. But I think the market economics will drive it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Anil Jain, for that lucid discussion of renewable and innovations in energy systems, especially in the G20. As you say, the divisions when it comes to renewables and innovation in the G20 in this area, they're particularly sharp and difficult to get consensus in that. But I was struck by one of the things that you said. While the G20 does have on its agenda climate change, it should obviously also have renewables and innovation in renewable energy systems as a part. Or does it come out in the wash, in a sense? The discussion on climate change will subsume the discussion on investments or innovations in alternative energy systems. That's a thought that I leave with you. But since Mr. Jain has to leave, may I request you to ask your questions of him before he goes. And please be brief, short, and introduce yourself.
It's rightly mentioned that shale gas revolution.
Please introduce Professor
I'm Raghuraman.
Yes.
I'm an energy, energy watcher. So,
Professor Raghuram used to be at IIM Bangalore and also was an advisor in TRAI, member of TRAI.
Mr. Jain, you rightly pointed out with respect to shale gas and also shale oil in the US, as the leading G20 country, it doesn't have much appetite for the alternate energy sources, and that's why you see the shift in the investments which has occurred over the years. Now, when we look at from our point of view, fossil fuel subsidy is not just a question of diesel subsidy alone. It's a question of underpricing of coal and the manner in which we will be able to really look at. Now, G20, when you're looking at Australia now, they have removed the carbon tax. You look at the ways in which now a lot of flip-flop is occurring around the world on policy shifts. So how are we going to get anchor the alternate energy sources? You said about deployment. For example, in US, the Tesla Motors, they are going on a huge thing on storage technology, especially lithium batteries for automotives. The question is one of actually looking on to the storage then actually deployment becomes faster. So I think how the innovative value chain is going to be fixed is something I don't know whether G20 will take up or other forums. So your thoughts on it?
Thank you, Professor. You had a question.
I just want to ask you as to why in India solar energy is always equated only with PV. Even the government advertisement which come out, please set up 100 megawatt of solar PV. There are many solar sort of ways to exploit solar. There's a solar thermal, there's a digital link, there are other things. And why only you concentrate on PV? Number one. Number two, the other technologies which are coming up in the world, like solar updraft tower, the sea solar power plant, and this nano PV, is not mentioned at all. And nobody is even aware of it in India that these things are happening. So is there any sort of scheme, some central group which keeps a track of these things and without any profit motive brings these technologies here and not bank only on the silicon PV?
Thanks. Yeah, I'm quite intrigued by one of the fact that...
Introduce yourself. Okay.
Yeah, I'm Kaushik from TED University. Yeah, actually, I'm quite intrigued by the fact that there is no discussion about decentralized distributed generation by making use of renewable energy, especially in the context of developing countries. And G20 has never taken it to the forefront. The foremost issue is that more than 450 million population, for instance, in India, is obviously do not have access to electricity. And if you look at the regulations, when we are talking in terms of the grid parity with the off-grid parity, then it becomes a real question, and it has never been solved. There's a document which has been brought out by the Forum of Regulator, but there's a clear lacuna in the problems because they have not been able to discuss on the tariffs as such. How can we bring in the tariff parity between decentralized distributed generations and grid-based electricity generations? So are these issues which are primarily relating to the developing countries like South Asian countries like India, Bangladesh, and of course, looking at the countries in the sub-Saharan Africa, why these issues are not taken to the forefront?
Yes, Professor. I'll take one.
My name is BKP Sinha. I am from Amity University and forester by profession. In rural areas, it is 70% of the consumption of energy is from the fuel wood or cow dung. And so what is the policy at present? There seems to be no policy at all. The forest area is shrinking and it has double consequences. One is the addition of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and another thing is the forest area is shrinking very fast. And at present doesn't seem to be any concrete policies, economic incentives or disincentives for this purpose. Number two, the hydro energy, which is very acclaimed and very much talked about, has, never takes into account the river ecology and river transport. So, the true cost benefit analysis of the hydro energy is never taken out, is never done. And as a result, it is being dominated only by engineers, not the river ecologist. So there's two aspects which I would like to draw the attention of this House here.
Thank you. I think we have a substantive base to go by. Mr. Anil Jain.
The first question, how will G20 anchor the innovations? And you gave examples of the innovations presently underway in US in battery development, battery storage, etc. As I mentioned that markets will play a major role, and even in US, as you're aware that now Tesla is putting up a very large, mega size battery plants, and they're expecting that that is going to lead to transformation in the EV sector fully. Now, in India, again, you are aware that we have a National Electric Mobility Mission, and they are looking at a subsidy of about 12,000 to 13,000 crore rupees they're looking from the government. And they're also looking at the market transformation and market forces to help usher in this, rather than subsidize manufacturing, subsidize infrastructure, etc. They are wanting to give direct subsidy to the consumers, so that there is a scale which is achieved, which Tesla has done. So they're trying to emulate from that thing. So where markets come in, G20 retreats. In fact, in the G20, you try to bring in the issue of oil prices, gas prices. There's immediately a reaction from countries which are major producers, and they say that this is not the forum to discuss prices. So I think the market dynamics will take over, and if India, which is a large automobile market, and similarly in other innovations of the alternate energy sector, wherever we are able to achieve scale, which we are steadily achieving, and you are aware of this huge dispute which even the US has raised about our domestic content in the solar. So the world looks upon India as a huge market, and how we transform our import status and technology deficit status to domestic manufacture by foreign companies and multinationals coming and setting up bases is a policy outlook. I don't think the G20 will be able to get into domestic issues. The second one is why so much focus on solar photovoltaic. Well, you are right that the Jawaharlal Nehru Solar Mission, which was launched in 2009-10, which laid down the targets for the year 2022, made a major target commitment towards solar photovoltaic and less towards the solar applications, the heat equivalent of heat collection, and the others. But I think the reasoning behind that was that they wanted, because India has been trying solar lanterns and solar cookers and solar rooftop by subsidy-led schemes and solar water heaters for a long time. But it did not make a tangible difference to the renewable energy story of India. So I think the view in the government was that let us develop some megawatt-sized plants. Let us develop 100 megawatt plants, where solar intensity is the maximum, and see for ourselves whether it can make a difference to the, as I said, the energy story of India. So initial phases, that's what they did. And what you get to read in actually Delhi is the work which is being done by the government of India. But I would say that actually 2/3 of the work or more is being done by the states, because the states are on their own, because they have to buy expensive power, so they're trying to develop the trend is now shifting, and as wind energy, solar energy become viable, looking to the high prices of electricity, then it'll be self-sustained. Decentralized distributed generation, not discussed in G20. Yes, it does not get discussed much in the G20, because there is at least I have felt that in the G20 the issues which get debated are more of the number country issues. More countries coming from the OECD, so there are more issues of investments and stuff like that. But the issue of microgrids and decentralized distributed generation, these issues are relevant only to developing countries where the grid has still not reached. So there's a hiatus between. So maybe because it is not a common problem, it does not get discussed. And as it is, we don't need to discuss everything in G20. We need to discuss only those things in G20 where you need a global understanding, emissions, carbon emissions, energy markets, energy investment. So that is that. And the fourth one regarding a lot of biomass and cow dung, etc., being used in the rural areas, and what is the government's policy towards that. And there is a thought in the government that we should take cleaner fuels into rural areas, and you've heard of the Rajiv Gandhi LPG Vitran scheme. And the general strategy of the government was that we will take natural gas, through pipe natural gas, to cities of India, to urban towns, and then this LPG which will get